So the city of Ephesus, which Paul is writing to the Christians in Ephesus, was kind of a major power player in the ancient world in the time of Paul. They were a port city and they were on a major trade route, and so they benefited significantly financially from being on that trade route. I think it was actually a deep water port on the Mediterranean, which is fairly unusual. They also, once Rome had conquered them or taken over that part of the world, they went and dedicated a portion of their land and built a temple to the cult worship of the emperor. And so as a result, or as a thank you, Rome made Ephesus the capital of that region. So they had this symbiotic relationship where they supported one another. And this was all to the benefit of the people who lived and worked in Ephesus. Because of it being on a trade route, Ephesus was also kind of a culturally diverse place. As people traveled that part of the world, people from all over, from different ethnicities, from different faith traditions, from different races and creeds, would come through Ephesus. And as a result, Ephesus had a plethora of shrines and icons and statues and temples to all the gods in the Hellenistic and Greek and Roman world. They were religiously diverse. In fact, the silversmiths, as you remember, made a good living making these little idols and icons for all the different gods that were worshipped in Ephesus, and they made good money. And they got really mad at Paul because he began to preach about monotheism, only worshiping one God, and suddenly their sales tanked, and now they're mad, and there's no Shark Tank for them to go on to get an infusion of money. So they had Paul and his buddies arrested and beaten as punishment for messing with their money. We think Paul was in Ephesus at one time for at least 2 years. As one of the other things about the city of Ephesus is it was a cultural and intellectual Mecca. There were little places called schools. Those could be an actual building. It could be a market, an area in the market, common market. It could be at the gates of the city. But people would come there to share their ideas and their politics and their faith traditions and their philosophical ideas, and they would engage in these really deep and prosperous discussions about all these different possibilities. And Paul spent almost 2 years working as either a tent maker or a leathersmith, we don't know which for sure, teaching in those schools. In fact, there are some churches that are believed to have started not because Paul went there and started them, but because people encountered him in Ephesus and heard his gospel and his good news, and they went home and told other people, and they turned it into a house church and a community of faith. That's how powerful things were in Ephesus. But there are also some problems. The overwhelming majority of Christians in Ephesus were Gentile. They didn't feel at home or welcome anywhere in the city. They had no place to be. They were at odds with the Orthodox Jewish Christians because they were fighting over whether or not you could eat meat to idols, about circumcision, about ceremonial rituals and cleanliness. So they were rejected by the Orthodox Jewish Christians. Rome didn't like them because the only people that Rome would allow to be monotheist were the Jewish people. Everyone else had to worship Caesar along with whatever other god. And since they refused to worship Caesar, now they didn't fit into the Roman world. They didn't even fit into the world of their own town, neighborhoods, or families. Because they began to worship only one God and no longer worshiped idols, it put them at odds with everyone else in their community. And they have nowhere to be, no home, no sense of belonging, and they feel powerless to affect change. Anybody feel that way? Powerless to affect change? So in Paul's efforts to strengthen their resolve, the very first thing he says is like, every family under heaven and in earth come from God. That's a pretty bold statement in the ancient world. And what Paul's saying is that we find our ground of being in Yahweh God. We find our purpose, our meaning. The 5 philosophical questions we all ask some point in our life are answered in the fact that God is at the center of everything. He's the ground of our being. He gives us purpose. God is how we do life. It's how we do what's called epistemology. And epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we know what we know, and how can we know what we know is true? If we're grounded in God, we have that. When we're grounded in God as the family of God, we also have this sense of our theory of being and doing, which is ethics. Because we now value what God values, we can make good moral choices about right and wrong and about what we do with our lives and how we interact with each other. But the most important thing is that we are all one in the family of God. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female, Jew or Greek, slave or free. We're all in the image of God. We're all part of the same family. And just think how if we truly believed that, there'd be so much less division and strife and violence in our world. If we truly believed everyone we met was another child of God, it would fundamentally change the way we interact with each other. Claiborne is a progressive evangelical theologian and author, and I've read several of his books. And in his one book called Irresistible Revolution, he talks about the time when he was in college and he and his friends were trying to figure out this whole faith thing and what it meant to be a Christian, and they were looking for this higher plane, this ultima thule of the Christian faith. What does it mean to be Christian? And so he and some of his friends decided to go to Calcutta one summer and work with Sister Teresa and the nuns treating lepers. Now, we know now that leprosy isn't a disease you can catch. It's actually a deadening of the nerves so you don't feel when you're digging at something, and it makes it worse and worse and worse. The leprosy has this cloud about it. It always has. And so Shane's in the hospital and he's working, and his first job was just to make sure the treatment stations got stocked, make sure there's gauze there, there's alcohol swabs there, that there's ointment there to put on the wounds. He was happy with that, right? He didn't actually have to touch a wound or look in the eyes of somebody and cause pain trying to treat them. So he was perfectly happy just stocking those treatment centers. Then one day, one of the nurse nuns came to him, and we're short-staffed. We need you to man a treatment station. What? I don't know how to do that. You've been watching this for weeks. It's not hard. You can do it. So he said with a lot of trepidation, he sat at his little station and he was working on this gentleman's wound, and he was afraid to look up. He knew he was causing pain. He didn't know what to do. So he was gently cleaning the wound and dressing it. And finally he screwed up the courage to look up. And the man was looking down and smiling at him and thanking him for caring enough to dress his wounds. And Shane said, in that moment, when I looked into his eyes, I remembered Matthew 25, and I saw Jesus in his eyes. Whatever you do to the least of these, you've done for me. Imagine a world where we see Jesus in the eyes of everybody we meet. Wow, wouldn't that change things? It's hard to hate somebody that you think you're treating like Jesus. It's hard to be different politically or religiously or progressive versus whatever, conservative. It's hard to let those things take hold of us and divide us if the person you're seeing on the other side of your eyes is Jesus. Maybe there'd be a few less mass shootings. Maybe we'd treat each other better. Maybe we'd be able to stay together in spite of our differences to do good in this community and world. When you look into somebody's eyes, you see Jesus. So the next thing Paul tells them to encourage them is like, look, you are rooted and grounded, rooted in the love of God. Now, this isn't any ordinary love. This is agape. This is a completely selfless, self-sacrificing love that very few humans are capable of. And Paul is saying, God has grounded you in this kind of love. Your roots go deep, super deep. So that when difficult times, when trials come your way, the wind of that can't blow you over or uproot you. You're down so deep in the love of God that nothing can uproot you. You're being nourished and you're growing, and those roots get deeper and deeper and stronger, and pretty soon nothing will remove you from the love of God. Nothing. And he says, try to imagine it this way. There's no height, width, depth, or length that can encompass this love of God and the love of Christ in us. It's that big, it's that bold, it's unconditional, it's long-suffering, it never gives up. And no matter what we do, no matter what we go, where we go, no matter how far from God we try to run, His love never fails us. So we're all children of God. We're all part of the same family. And because we're rooted in this deep agape love, nothing, absolutely nothing, can remove us from the love of God. In Romans, he says, neither height nor depth, death, persecution. He goes through a whole laundry list of things that can never separate us from the love of God through Christ. But there's a catch to all of this positive thinking for the Ephesians. In the last verse, because you're all a family, because your being is grounded in the existence and purpose of God, because you find your ethical and your theoretical basis of life in the existence of God, because He's your ground of being, because He loves you and has rooted you deeply in this self-sacrificial, unselfish love, now there's an expectation that you can do more and greater than you ever imagined. So imagine being one of these Gentile Christians in Ephesus in the first century, and your Jewish brothers and sisters don't like you, your Roman brothers and sisters don't like you, maybe your own brothers and sisters don't like you, and you're looking for a place to be. You feel powerless. You don't feel like you can affect change. And he says, with God, what you can achieve is unimaginable. And this speaks to me and us. With a few exceptions, most of us are getting older, right? I am. And we're getting tired. And every time we plan something new, or it's just a battle to get the gumption to go do it. We're tired and we're old and we're not as good at what we used to do. We take naps in the I do. Take naps in the afternoon on Sundays. And we're all waiting for the younger generations to get here to take over for us or to lighten the load or to help out. But guess what? They may not be coming. Spoiler alert. Our culture and our faith traditions have changed so dramatically. Young people are struggling to be a part of it. And the ones that do come, they're busy building careers or in their kids' lives. They don't have time to come and help out. So guess what? It's on us. We have a lot of things coming up in this next few months. And it's going to take all of us putting in some effort. The standard rule in church is that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. It's been true in every church I've ever been in. I need more than 20%. God needs more than 20%. If you're on a committee, you need to be active on that committee. You need to give us your input and your thoughts and your ideas. Be there to discuss things and vote. When we have this event in October, it's going to be all hands on deck to make that happen. If we do trunk or treat, give out candy on Halloween, if only 3 of us show up, we're not making much of a statement in our community. But here's the thing. Paul tells them, and he tells us, that even the littlest bit of effort on our part, and we can do things beyond imagination. What's limiting our imagination? Are we just too soft and comfortable? What are we willing to risk to reach out into our community for the common good and make a difference and share our faith with people? Through building relationships. Here's what I'm going to close with. Final question. I'm going to leave you with it to mull it over. What is your vision for this church? Have you thought of it? Do you have one? Over the next week, I want you to spend some time. If I could build any church at North Vernon First, what would it look? What would we be doing? What would happen? What would be different? What is your vision for doing unimaginable things because of God's undying love for us?